Welcome back to another video where I ruin everything you once loved. Let's get into why I don't recommend the food marble. Now, before I can get into my 6 or so reasons I don't recommend this device to my patients or my students, let's first do a 20-second crash course on GI breath testing. Then we're going to talk about the 3 reasons why you might have heard that you need this device. So, number 1, here's how breath testing works. Ready? Gas is produced somewhere in the gut. Don't mind that the arrow's coming from one specific location. Just think gas produced in the gut. Some of that gas makes its way into the bloodstream. Your blood circulates through your body, makes it over to the lungs, and then we are measuring the hydrogen and the methane and whatever else from our exhaled breath. So this gas took a journey from your gut to your blood to your lungs and out into the device that you're measuring it with. That's the general gist. Now, let's get into the 3 reasons why the company says that you need this device, or why YouTubers and Instagrammers are saying that you need this device, all of which I don't agree with personally. I think that there's some flawed logic in all of these. And then we're going to get into why I think that this device isn't nearly as useful as people are making it seem. So, number 1, this sounds logical enough, right? SIBO. You can use this as a very cheap at-home SIBO breath test. The idea being that the food marble costs about $250. Each SIBO breath test is somewhere between $200 and $300. So the logic goes that if you're going to do more than one breath test at some point, you might as well invest in this little device and do it on the cheap. The more breath testing you do for SIBO, the more bang for your buck you're going to get. Again, it's sound logic. The financial side of it is very sound logic, and I totally understand that. Number 2. Again, this seems great at kind of first-hand cursory glance. They say you can use this device and the packets that they have available to test your tolerance to various FODMAPs. We all know what a pain in the neck the low FODMAP diet is, right? We're not hiding that. And the idea of challenging each individual food again and finding out where your tolerance is and what specific FODMAPs you have a problem with, like, wow, that sounds like so much work. And frankly, not everybody can have the money to work with a dietitian who's trained by Monash University. So it's so appealing to think that you could buy this device and not only use it as a SIBO breath test, but you can buy their little sachets for a really reasonable price, and you can challenge the sorbitol, the fructose, the lactose, and I believe inulin is the 4th one that they have in a sachet. And they have a whole protocol, and it's so appealing. I'm going to get into why I don't agree with this, but it sounds like a brilliant idea at first glance. And then finally, the 3rd way that the company says that you could use this device is just daily use. If you eat a meal, you can track your symptoms, you can track your stools, you can track what FODMAPs are in the food that you just ate. You can take a picture of the meal and upload it into the app, and you can correlate all of these things with your breath exhaled and really get a good sense, supposedly, of what your tolerance is to a particular meal or a particular food as you challenge these foods. And again, from the user standpoint and from the information I'm seeing on the internet and how this is promoted, these all sound like such great things, and I wish I could love this device. Know that at this point in the video. I wish I could recommend this because this all sounds great. But let's get into each of these bit by bit and talk about why I think they probably aren't as beautiful and wonderful as we thought they were. And now let's get into the reasons why I don't recommend this device, no matter what purpose you're trying to use it for. We're going to start with the SIBO testing thing because that's the easiest for me to knock out real quick, and then we're going to focus on these other 2, which are a little bit more complicated and nuanced. So first off, the deal with SIBO breath testing, right? We ingest the substrate, we let the substrate make its way down the tube, and then depending on where the fermentation happens, we get a peak in breath gases, and then we could use the time on the clock to determine where that gas came from. So the idea is that we have a lot of bacteria and therefore a lot of fermentation and gas production happening in the colon, versus there's not a mucho happening in the small intestine by comparison. So we shouldn't have a lot of gas production until we hit the colon. That is sound. However, the problem with all SIBO breath testing, including the food marble, is that we don't know the time on the clock that represents this transition. And it's going to be different for me versus you versus your uncle versus your great aunt Bernice They're all going to be totally different. And we have no idea where this happens because it varies very widely from individual to individual. For some people, oral cecal transit time, the time to get from your mouth to the cecum, which is the first part of your colon, for some people that can happen in 10 minutes. And in some people it's 3 hours. We don't know. Unless you've had an oral cecal transit study with a radioactive isotope following this substrate down your gut, you have absolutely no idea what yours is. And therefore, your ability to look at the clock or your doctor's ability to look at the clock and say, that peak came from the small intestine and therefore it's SIBO, versus, oh, that came from the colon and you're totally fine, we do not know. Now, it's worthy of saying that a lot of different people and a lot of companies and countries have different standards for this. Nobody agrees. So, for example, there are companies in the United States right now who are still offering a 3-hour SIBO breath test, which is completely asinine. Genova Diagnostics, I'm looking at you. Stop offering this test. I can almost guarantee that 99% of the results that you get in the 3rd hour is just gas coming from the dang colon. It is outrageous that this company is still selling this test and that my community, the functional medicine community, still orders it for their patients. So that's one. But then you look at something like the North American Consensus on Breath Testing, and they say that 90 minutes is a reasonable cutoff for this point for people when we're doing SIBO breath testing. Okay? And they're not really making as much mention about different substrates and how that affects things. Versus in Europe, they say that 60 minutes should be the cutoff. But again, we have some studies indicating that oral cecal transit time might be as fast as 10 minutes. So there are studies that are seriously looking at the validity of any SIBO breath testing because we might have some people where the substrate whips through and you generate gas very early on in the SIBO breath test and it has nothing at all to do with the small bowel or with SIBO. So again, whether you're doing the Trio Smart or Aero Diagnostics or the asinine 3-hour Genova test or Food Marble, SIBO breath testing is intrinsically flawed. We do not know where this line is. We have no way of knowing. We're chasing the wrong goose. And for that reason, and just for people's mental health and sanity and effectiveness, I'm just not a big fan of retesting for SIBO. Even if you have one single test that shows that you have SIBO, again, maybe, I'm not a big fan of retesting. We don't need to chase that goose of the perfect SIBO test. What I have found clinically is that people who chase the perfect test almost always feel worse and worse and worse with every passing treatment protocol, and it leads them to more and more restrictive diets and harsh treatments and things like the elemental diet and harsh antibiotics that destroy the rest of their microbiome. So SIBO breath testing with the Food Marble, in my humble opinion, is a no. Now, getting into the two that are a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to try to share this as best I can, acknowledging first that I do want to do some specific videos about fructose breath testing and fructose intolerance in the future on this channel. But when we look at the idea of getting the mail-away sachets, getting the sorbitol and fructose and the lactose packets, and doing a kind of standardized controlled breath test, much like you would a SIBO test with a prep diet and everything, there are still some intrinsic flaws with this. Now, first of all, I'm going to point out just real easy, and this goes for actually all three of these, the amount of gas produced does not correlate with symptom severity. Let me repeat that. The amount of gas produced in a breath test does not correlate with symptom severity. And again, maybe because we're chasing the wrong thing and we're labeling something as pathogenic when it actually is not. Now, there is some correlation with methane. The more methane you exhale, the more constipated you tend to be. But with hydrogen in particular, and probably hydrogen sulfide, there's no correlation with the degree of overgrowth or the degree of symptom severity with the quantity of gas. But again, this is the whole idea of the Food Marble. If you blow a low number, either after a meal or in reference to a challenge test, cool, hooray for you, you're good to go. And if you blow a high number, then oh boy, you have to avoid that food. But that logic actually doesn't have as much research to support it as you might have been led to believe. Now, the other thing that is problematic with the FODMAP reintroduction strategy in particular is that singling out one chemical or one FODMAP and introducing that in isolation sounds really good and really scientific, but it's actually very flawed. So I'm going to look at fructose first and then fructose and polyols next. fructose in particular. The idea is that you ingest the fructose, it makes its way down into the tube, and then you are going to absorb some of it, but not all of it. And then any leftover fructose that's in the intestines is going to ferment, especially if it gets down into the colon. That's going to ferment, and then you have gas production, and then bada bing, bada boom, you could be diagnosed with fructose intolerance. But here's the thing. Monash University, the people who research and develop the dang low FODMAP diets, have this in their materials all over the place. The amount of malabsorption that occurs, so how much you're absorbing versus how much makes it down into the colon, does not correlate with the symptoms one experiences when they eat fructose foods. Fructose breath testing, just in general, does not work. This is not a thing. And again, I'm going to do deeper videos on this soon enough, so please be patient with me. But fructose breath testing in particular is very flawed. We were overdiagnosing the snot out, and still do to some extent, overdiagnosing the snot out of this for a really long time when we started realizing that the people who have an abnormal or a positive fructose breath test are not always the people who respond poorly to fructose-containing foods. You're actually much better off doing a trial with food as opposed to doing a breath test. So that's point number one against doing this introduction. Now, the other thing is that the amount of malabsorption, quote unquote, that occurs with polyols also does not seem to correlate with symptom presentation. So if you ingest the polyol and you have a high breath gas number that is indicative of malabsorbing that sugar, that actually does not suggest that you're going to have symptoms from that. The amount of malabsorption that occurs with these malabsorbed sugars versus the symptoms that one experiences, those two things are not as solidly correlated as you might think they would be. But here's another thing with fructose. So again, we ingest the fructose, it makes its way down, some of it gets absorbed, some of it does not. That is tremendously impacted by the presence of glucose. So if you eat or drink a pure fructose packet, that is much different than eating something like mango or even honey. The glucose in that solution actually is going to alter the absorption or the malabsorption in your intestines. So again, why are we doing fructose breath testing when A, we know it doesn't necessarily correlate with symptoms, but B, we know that glucose and probably other things like fat and protein and fiber and other carbs is going to manipulate the degree of malabsorption that's happening in the intestines in the first place. It doesn't work the way that we think it does. Okay, now, all of this being said, you might be thinking, all right, the FODMAP thing is out. The SIBO thing is out. But I could still use this for daily use, right? Like I could eat a meal and I can blow this number and that's going to indicate whether or not I have issues. Well, again, remember, the degree of breath gas production does not correlate with symptoms. And the degree of malabsorption or absorption of these sugars doesn't always correlate with symptoms. But I'm going to point out a bigger flaw with that logic for the daily use, and then I'm going to kind of reach the pinnacle of this particular video with my actual number one concern is the last one I'm going to talk about. So let's see. Let me erase a little bit of this first. Okay, so let's think about using this for daily use. You're just a normal Joe Schmo or Jane Schmo. You're going through your life, you're eating your meals, and you're trying to figure out for the life of you if those meals are instigating symptoms for you. So you're going through life and you're trying to figure this out. Well, with daily use, that means that you did not do a prep diet. One of the redeeming qualities of SIBO breath testing, for all that it's deeply flawed, and one of the redeeming qualities of their protocol for the FODMAP challenge, although it's deeply flawed, is at least they have you do a prep diet first. So in the case of SIBO, for example, you do a prep diet with the idea of it being low residue, low fermentation, low FODMAP, low everything. It's like white rice, white potatoes, white bread, and egg whites or something. It's terrible. But the idea is that you do a prep diet and you get rid of a lot of the bacteria, or you quiet them down, at least. You reduce the fermentation and the gas production coming from your colon. And that way, when the substrate comes through, any of the breath gas that's produced, theoretically, is coming from a location that we can predict based on the time on the watch. That's the whole idea. If you had a bunch of stuff fermenting in your colon, going to town, producing gas, that's going to completely negate any usefulness of the SIBO breath test, right? Right? Like this is something that's known. So why do we think that we can get this data from daily use of the food marble? How are we supposed to know, for example, let's say you eat breakfast and you get a bad score on your food marble. Who's to say that that bad score is coming from the breakfast that's situated here in your gullet? Or maybe you haven't had a bowel movement. Or even if you have had a bowel movement, maybe there's some residual stool in your colon or some food in your intestines. What if you're actually blowing that high number on the food marble with your breakfast because of something that's fermenting down here or down here? Similarly, let's say you eat breakfast and that goes totally fine. And then you use the food marble for your lunch. Same rationale. Well, now you've got the food that just entered your gullet from your lunch, but you also have that food from breakfast, which is probably situated somewhere down here in the lower part of your small intestine. And you might even have some residual food or some stool left over from the day prior. Who's to say which of those meals is contributing to your gas production? We don't know. So that's one of the big problems I have with daily use, is that we have no idea if the gas production is actually coming from that meal. And I know what some of you are going to say. Well, lady, that's why you do a baseline production gas breath test before you eat your meal, and then you do a follow-up one after your meal. Yes. However, the contents of your GI system are always moving and churning. Who's to say you didn't move something along your colon or along your small intestine and you mixed it up in just the right way that now more of the gas is getting into your bloodstream? These are the things I would love to see in research, and we simply do not know, but I'm highly, highly suspicious that one of these other locations of the bowel could be contributing to the breath gases that we're seeing with repeated daily use of something like a food marble. So you blow a big number, I'm not necessarily going to demonize that food that you just ate. And then last but not least, I don't even need my markers for this one. Last but not least, my number one concern with the food marble is I think it's going to almost universally lead to disordered eating. This is the kind of stuff that Amy and I talk about all dang day on the IBS Freedom podcast, and I'm going to scream it from the rooftops until the day I die. We need to get back to listening to our bodies, trusting our bodies, and listening to our experience of the world above any fancy schmancy test and above any fancy schmancy scary ass data. If you repeatedly are getting bad numbers, bad grades, bad metrics, lots of gas production, or if you are getting results that show that you have SIBO or you have fructose intolerance when actually you don't, not only is that going to lead to over-treatment of those things that you actually do not have, but also you're going to start getting freaked out and paranoid and anxious AF, and then you're going to feel married to this device. I saw testimonials and stuff on their website where people said, this device is my best friend. And I know what they're getting at, but I found that to be very sad and very concerning. We should not be married to a device like this. We should not be relying on a device like this for all of our information about our body. And I really think it's a slippery slope until we get to a point where we lose all trust in our body and we are 10 out of 10 freaked out all the time, and it's frying our vagus nerve, frying our motility, and then we actually do give ourselves frickin' SIBO because we're so dang stressed. So please, if you're on the fence of whether to buy this or not, heed this. I'm not saying to buy it or not buy it. Statements like that got me in trouble previously with another company about a year ago, so I'm not going to say that. But these are my concerns, and I think that we need to weigh the pros and cons of this device very heavily before we consider purchasing it. Of course, I just said you need to listen to your body and you need to trust your experience. And then I kind of left it at that and left you hanging, and you're probably thinking, great, lady, how do I do that? Well, at the risk of the end of every video being kind of a commercial, here's my commercial for FODMAP Freedom. You ready? That's exactly what I teach you in FODMAP Freedom. Honest to God, this is why I love this program so much, not because I created it and I'm totally biased, but also because we get results. I am just wrapping up the fall cohort with my class right now, and oh my God, we have people eating all the FODMAPs again. We have people who were told maybe correctly, maybe incorrectly, that they had SIBO, and they're feeling great. And we have people who are getting back to their normal day-to-day life, eating the food they want, interacting with people, and just feeling great. And I would love that experience for you too. So if you're feeling like there's a lot of noise and a lot of BS out in the world, and that you're totally overwhelmed with the research and the podcasts and the YouTube videos and the Facebook groups, and you don't know where to go, and you can't build a protocol for the life of you, and you're feeling worse and worse, and you're just feeling stuck, I encourage you to check out FODMAP Freedom. Come over to the dark side. We have gluten, we have cookies, we have onion, we have garlic, and it's really a great time. We are going to be enrolling again in January of this year, so go ahead and check it out. You can join the wait list. All that means is that you're the first to know when we're enrolling, and you get first dibs on a seat. I did have to close enrollment last time because I didn't want the class to get too big, so being on that wait list is really advantageous if you think even a little bit that you might join us. Go ahead and check it out. I'm going to put the link down in the doobly-doo down below, and I will see you in the next video here on this channel. Hey guys, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe, ring the bell, click the like button, and leave a comment down below with the videos that you would like to see me do next. Doing all of those really helps support the channel and support my efforts in making as many videos as possible for you guys. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.